What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mercedes-Benz W211 E63 AMG. Today on the AMG behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your crankcase breather valve, also known as a PCV valve or breather pipe. Now, this DIY is going to be applicable to all vehicles equipped with an M156 engine. In front of me, we have the new valve, some intake manifold hardware, and some intake manifold gaskets. All of these are available as a kit on fcpeuro.com. Now, a couple of telltale signs that your valve is going bad is typically when you shut off the vehicle, or even when it's idling, you may hear some whistling coming out of the firewall area, meaning the back of the intake manifold, the back of the motor, right up against the firewall. When you shut off the car, it may hiss for a few minutes, a few seconds, depending on how bad it has failed. If you go to pull the dipstick out and it releases the pressure and the sound stops, then you know that there's a chance that this has gone bad. In addition to that, you'll see a lot of oil in the intake manifold itself as it's failing to do its actual job. Other thing to consider is the fact that this is controlling, aka the crankcase breather. So there's a diaphragm in here. So as these fail, you're going to create positive pressure in a negative way inside of your motor. So with that being said, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. For this DIY, we're going to be using an electric ratchet just to speed things up a bit. We have a 3/8 drive torque wrench, a 17mm flared wrench. You can use a normal 17mm wrench instead. We have a couple flathead screwdrivers as well as a small pick. Along with those, I'm using a flexible CTA screwdriver with a 6mm hex head on the end of it. I'm going to use that for some hose clamps. We have a 1/4" ratchet with a couple adapters. We have a T25, a T30, a T45. Then I have some flush cuts, some fuel line pliers, and a paint marker so we can torque down our hardware and mark it down. Now with that covered, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are under the hood of the W211. We're going to start by removing our beauty cover and our air boxes. To remove the front portion of the beauty cover, you want to press from underneath on either side of the tabs by the top of the air boxes. These are pretty brittle and they will just break if you lift them up from the front. And we can pull it off. Set this to the side. From here, we can go ahead and remove these two tiny covers that sit over the connectors of our mass airflow sensors. While we're here, we can also disconnect the sensors. The driver's side bank has a release tab on the top, passenger on the bottom. Now we have 5 T25s to remove on either airbox. We have one on the front, one on the rear. Driver's side bank is by the fuel line, passenger bank is by the dipstick. You have 2 on the intake manifold side and 1 on the firewall corner. Then using either a flathead screwdriver or a 6mm bit, you can undo the hose clamp that holds it to your Y plenum here and pulling it out. Go ahead and set these to the side with your air filter. We'll do the same thing on the passenger side bank now. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove this Y plenum that feeds into our intake manifold. It's got 2 tabs, one on either end of the manifold throat that you release. So let's go ahead and pull that out. You have 1 vacuum line to disconnect underneath the plenum as well. You can usually just pull the little elbow towards you. Just be careful, these get brittle over age. Ours is in really good shape. Surely has been replaced at some point, but you don't want to yank this out before disconnecting that. Here are the 2 tabs that we were mentioning earlier. It's easier to release the driver's side first and then the passenger side after. Go ahead and set this to the side. Next, we're going to pull out the remainder portion of our air boxes. These simply lift up and pull out. Just like that. We'll do the same thing on the other side. With that plenum off, we're going to go ahead and put a shop towel in there just to keep any debris from falling in. Be mindful of your intake air temperature sensor that's down there as well. You don't want to damage it by accident when you put something down there. With that resting there, we're going to continue on getting ready to remove our fuel rail and injectors. So next up is going to be to remove these insulating pads here. Just be careful, they kind of degrade over time. Ours are still in okay shape. We'll go ahead and pop them up, set them to the side. These mass airflow sensor connectors, I'm just going to tuck away on either side. Along this vacuum line is going to come with us in a little bit, so you can just let it dance around for now. Moving back up front, we have a fuel pressure sensor on the rail here that we're going to want to disconnect. And then along both sides of the fuel rails, for those of you that watched our fuel injector DIY, you'll know that the harness is typically zip tied to the fuel rail itself. We're going to go ahead and snip those zip ties off. There should be 6 in total, so that once we have the fuel rail up, we can disconnect the harness from the injectors and just set it to the side. So 6 zip ties in total. We'll replace these as we assemble everything again later. Up front on the passenger side bank, you have a release valve that you're going to want to take the cap off. Ours is missing, so the cap's already off. Using a towel or some sort of shop towel, you're going to want to cover this area and release the pressure from it. So I'm going to combine this with a flathead screwdriver. We'll let the fuel come out, and then we'll be able to undo our fuel line from the back against the driver's side of the firewalls. I'll get this towel situated in place. All right, we have enough of the initial pressure removed. We'll catch any fuel that drips out of that line with the same towel. So let's move over to that back corner now. Next, we're going to go ahead and break free our fuel line to the fuel rail. It uses a 17mm nut. I'm using a flared wrench, as I mentioned at the beginning, just so I have a more secure bite on this nut. However, a regular 17 will work as well. We'll leave that weighted there. For now, I'm going to remove this towel, but we're going to use it once more before we pull the fuel rail out, as there's still going to be fuel in here and on the other bank. So we're going to want to plug the end here with the towel when we pull it out. So for now, we can just leave it there, tucked away in the corner. It collects anything else that drips out. Now we can release this brake booster hose. There's a tab on the top, tab on the bottom that you squeeze together, and then the hose pops out. Just like that. That can stay there for now. We don't want to move it too much, as it can be brittle depending on the age of the vehicle and how original it is. Now, while I have you over here still, we're going to move over to the crankcase valve itself and disconnect a vacuum line that's going to come out with the manifold while we have you over here. So let's go ahead and detach that next. Now we can simply lift it up off of the crank valve, and then at this yellow joint right here, you can simply gently pull it away and it'll separate. That'll stay on the car. This will come out with the manifold. Next on our laundry list, we're going to work on freeing up this vacuum line from these speed clips on the rear portion of the manifold on the driver's side bank. Just enough so that we have some wiggle room to pull out our fuel rail once we're ready. If they're too tight, you can kind of pry them up a little bit with a flathead screwdriver, but ours are pretty loose. We can simply lift them up by grabbing on either side of the vacuum line and pulling towards us. That should give us enough play to get this fuel rail out. So with that being said, to undo the fuel rail, we have 4 T30s that hold it into place. So we'll zap those out with the ratchet real quick. With all 4 T30s removed, we can slowly work up the fuel rail off of the manifold. And then one by one, we'll go around and disconnect all 8 injectors from the harness. For this, I'm going to use a small right-angled pick just to help me out, as the tabs are a little bit small. All right, I'm going to use the tool to kind of get underneath the receiving tab or the locking tab on the connector. Then on the other end, I'll push on the tab, and then hopefully we can work these out. So to give you a better look, what I'm doing is I'm reaching underneath with the pick and I'm pressing up on this clip that locks into our injector, while I'm also depressing the tab on the other end, and then we're pulling out. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other 7. Now with all 8 disconnected, we're going to gently work out this fuel injector rail. I'm going to keep this towel back here to kind of plug this port. As I mentioned earlier, there's still going to be some fuel in here. You get it over the manifold, tilt it up, and gently bring it to us. It's like a carnival game where you can't touch the sides or you'll shock yourself. And then we'll slowly pull the rail out, and then we'll gently set this to the side. This is also a good time to inspect your injectors. Now, we just replaced these about a week ago, so we know they're in great shape, but if you know the M156, you know that these are a common problem. They will stay open, cause your engine to hydrolock, so good opportunity to replace these while you're in here. So let's set these to the side and then we'll continue on. With the fuel rail out, we have a couple items to disconnect at the front of our manifold, starting with this vacuum line. You do not want to touch the side or the manifold side of it, as this is part of the manifold. If you break this, you're looking at a new manifold. So you're going to want to disconnect it at this check valve, this blue one. Simply grab it and separate it gently, and this will come up with our manifold, no problem. From there, we have 4 electrical connectors to disconnect. So we're all just going to start from the top and work our way down. They all have different housings. They all only go in one way, so it's going to be very hard to mix them up. So don't worry about that. And the length of the cables will also determine kind of where they go. So starting with the top one, pinch either side, work it off to the back. There we go. Next one, same deal, pinch both sides. This third one on ours is a bit broken, but there should be a release tab on either side. Ours is just on the inboard, so we'll go ahead and free that one up. You can see why it's been broken before. The tab is a little bit weird to release here. Okay. And then the last one has a release tab up top. Now for the most part, that should leave the front of our manifold nice and free. Now we're going to work over to the back passenger corner with our T30, and we're going to separate the PCV valve from the intake manifold, and then we'll pry it off and kind of just let it sit there. All right, T30 is out, and while I have you back there, I'm going to go ahead and pop this valve off of our intake manifold. There we go. Now we're going to go ahead and work on removing the 10 T45s that hold our manifold to our block. So with the electric ratchet, we're just going to go around and zap all 10 off. Just keep in mind, these are one-time use aluminum bolts. They are torque to yield, so you most certainly do not want to reuse these at all. Plus they come with the kit, so you're just gonna go ahead and chuck these once you have them all out. Before we go ahead and pull up our manifold, we have 2 more things to take into consideration. 1, we have that intake air temperature sensor, which we mentioned earlier. And 2, we have one more T30 for this line that goes into the back of our intake manifold that we're gonna wanna remove just to give us some more wiggle room before we disconnect it. So 1 T30 on top of the driver's side valve cover. And then I'm going to go ahead and thread the T30 back into the valve cover just so that I know it's there for later. And I will have more than enough wiggle room. Now we're going to go ahead and start pulling the manifold up, being mindful of that intake air temperature sensor that we still need to disconnect. Now we should be able to pull this whole manifold out to a point where we can go ahead and release this last line. So let's go ahead and do that. With that line removed, we can go ahead and set our manifold to the side. Now, if you don't want to take the whole manifold off, you can leave that line attached and simply work with the manifold off to the side. But we're going to work on cleaning ours up a little bit. So let's go ahead and set it off on the table. All right, my good people, with the manifold out, we're going to do what we came to do here, and that's going to be to remove that old valve and install our new one. Pinch either end of the hose. Here's the new one as an example. These are the ends we're pinching. So we'll pinch those and pull away from the bottom of the block. There we go. The most gentle snug up on that pipe without breaking it or bending it or pinching it. Made it so that we can pull this out the rest of the way. Now we're gonna go ahead and just pop our new one in there and have it seated ready for action. Boom, baby. There we go. Now we're gonna go ahead and work on cleaning up our old gaskets, taking those off, and we'll set our new ones in. When you install these gaskets, you want the impression of the gasket, the raised portion of them, or the raised portion of the gasket facing up towards the intake manifold. We're installing them the same way that the old ones came out. All right, now we can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. All right, my good people, we have our manifold cleaned up. We cleaned up the valley here. We got our new gaskets on. We're basically ready to install the intake manifold once more. Our valve is already situated back there. So we're gonna get the manifold up here like we had it earlier. Reinstall this line. This clamp is reusable, especially if you have the right fuel line pliers for it. So we'll show you how to use those. So let's get started with that. Now with that line situated, we're gonna gently, being mindful of it, situate our manifold closer so then we can reconnect our intake air temperature sensor once more. All right. Once you have the intake manifold fully seated, you'll be able to feel it lock itself onto the dowels on the engine block. I then recommend that you go around with a flashlight and just make sure you didn't pinch any wiring, you didn't pinch a hose, you didn't bend this vacuum line back here, or get it intermingled with your intake air temperature. All of the above, my good people. Now we're gonna go ahead and hand feed our 10 new T45s. Just gonna drop them in first. Get them started by hand, just a couple threads. I'm just gonna snug them down to the manifold very gently. Do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten down these intake manifold bolts. There's a sequence to them, which we'll go ahead and show you now, but we're going to start on the passenger side bank first. And we're going to torque it down to 10 Newton meters. Again, using our T45, followed by the driver's side rear bolt by the firewall. And then essentially the pattern's going to continue until they cross over to the other side. So again, 10 Newton meters is going to be the first stage for all 10. All right, that was the first stage, 10 Newton meters on all 10 bolts. Now we're going to follow the same sequence, but we're going to give each one a 90-degree turn. And then once we're done with that, we're going to hit it with the third stage. All right, that is stage 2 complete. Now for the final stage, we're gonna go ahead and give each bolt about 10 degrees. For my own sake, I'm gonna go ahead and hit these with the paint pen, just so that I know they're torqued. And I think it kind of looks cool, even though I'm not expecting these to go loose. While I have you up here, my good people, we're gonna reconnect our electrical sensors up front. Same way they came off, we're gonna go from the last one upwards. While we're up here still by our EGR valves, we're gonna go ahead and reconnect this vacuum line so we don't forget it. Beautiful. Moving out back, we're gonna reconnect our brake booster back into our manifold. Just really nice and easy, just like that. Now we can go ahead and reconnect our new breather hose assembly into the back of our manifold, and then we'll secure it with the T30. If you're gonna torque that one down, you're gonna torque it down to about 9 Newton meters. We're just gonna snug it up gently with the ratchet, and then we'll hook up our vacuum line. All right, now we can reconnect that vacuum line that's back there as well. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our fuel injector rail. Feed that under like so. Obviously trying to be very mindful of that vacuum line and the injectors at the same time. Now before we do anything else, let's go ahead and go around and start plugging in our fuel injectors back into the harness. We can also replace those zip ties that we cut out. Let's plug in the other side real quick. With that situated, we can go ahead and seat the injectors back into the intake manifold. All right. Now we can go ahead and feed our 4 T30s back in. We're just gonna go ahead and snug these down, but if you're torquing them along at home, 7 Newton meters is more than enough to secure these to the intake manifold. We can also resecure our line back to the valve cover using the same T30. Same thing with this one, 7 to 9 Newton meters is gonna be the most you wanna torque this down to. We're just gonna go ahead and snug it up by hand since it's such a low torque value. Don't forget to pop this vacuum line back underneath those speed nuts or speed clips. We can also go ahead and reattach our fuel rail. Again, 17mm wrench. If you have a crow's foot that you wanna use, you can torque this down to 20 Newton meters. We're just gonna go ahead and snug it up gently. Now with that situated, you don't wanna forget to pull out your towel, and we can go ahead and just plop both of the lower portions of our air box back in. Before you put those boxes in, don't forget to put your insulation pads back on. You can install the lower portion of your air box. Before we install our Y-plenum, you want to make sure you bring back your mass airflow sensor wiring over to the front. Then you're going to go ahead and seat this evenly so both tabs lock into the bottom of the intake manifold. And you're going to want to connect your vacuum line. Beautiful, both click down very nicely. Everything's happy, connectors aren't pinched, vacuum line isn't bent. Now we can install the top portions of our air box along with the filter. And we'll hand start our hardware first. Now using our T25 on our electric ratchet, we're just gonna go ahead and snug all of them down. Now be gentle as these are just going into plastic. Plug in our mass airflow while we're here. And we can tighten down our clamp. And then we'll repeat the same process on the other side, my good people. Beauty covers can go back over the mass airflow sensor connectors. And last but not least, we can put our beauty cover front piece back on. Boom, baby. There we have it, my good people. Another DIY.
Wait a minute, who are you?
In the books. Not a bad job on the W211. Definitely a couple while you're in their jobs, as I mentioned before. But if you like this DIY, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's specific things you want to see done to this vehicle, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.